Greetings, I'm Tom Kraus. I'm the co-founder of Kraus Bell Group, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. We have recently done a workshop day-long for your top 40 senior leaders. We spent the day presenting material and answering questions and having discussion. It was a really good day, and one of the things that is memorable about it for me is the good quality of the questions that were asked during that seminar. And so I thought it would be beneficial to review some of those questions and how we answered them in this videotape. For context, I have been working in this field for a little over 40 years. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist and an experimental psychologist. I started working in this area on a methodology which came to be called behavior-based safety. It was groundbreaking at that time, and it had some advantages. It also had some disadvantages. In the course of doing that work over a period of years, we got interested in why there was variation in outcome across organizations that implemented the same methodology. And so we did a study to see if we could figure out what was going on with that. And we found that the strongest predictor of success in behavior-based safety was safety leadership capability. And so that led to us working on, so what does it mean to be an effective safety leader? What do effective safety leaders do? How do they think about things? How are they different than other leaders? And so on. And then along came a very interesting problem from a client, which was that their smaller injuries were declining over a long period of years, but the serious and fatal injuries that they were having were level during that same time period. Now, by the dominant theory, that triangle that you've all seen, those lines should be parallel. And so what's up? How does that all work? We studied their data, and then we got 6 other companies and aggregated all of their data to see if we could unravel that. And what we found was that smaller injuries come into 2 very broad categories. One is a small injury which has a very low probability of being anything but a small injury. The other is a small injury that, because of randomness or luck, good luck, bad luck, was small but could have been serious or fatal. And so when you're reducing smaller injuries, what matters is to what extent are you getting at those small injuries that have the potential to be serious. And then in the last 5 years or so, we've been working on safe decision making. And decision making is something that's been studied for a long, long time. The work of Kahneman and Tversky in the early 90s and since has been pivotal and has taught us a lot about how decisions are compromised. And we'll spend some time talking today about how that all works. But our interest has been studying across many, many organizations to determine what kinds of decisions are pivotal to injuries in general and to serious injuries and fatalities. Where do they occur in the organization? Are they at the front line, supervisory, up at the top? And what kinds of categories of decisions are most important? So we'll review some of that content today. So one of the questions that came up quite a few different times was about climate, safety climate, and safety culture, and what's the difference between those two, and how do they interact together? Which one should we be paying attention to, and in what ways, and so on and so on. And so I want to give you kind of a quick summary of what we have learned about those things. So now, safety climate means what we are paying attention to in the organization right now. Now, that might be the building up of a value for safety, or it might be anything else related to safety or not. But the point is that leaders, by what they pay attention to, affect the climate on a short-term basis. Doesn't take very long at all to change the climate. The culture, on the other hand, is much deeper and much harder to get at and takes much longer. It takes a long time to change a culture of an organization. So by culture is meant the shared common values in the organization. Also, that can be seen as how we get things done around here. So the research that we have done on climate and culture with respect to safety has yielded certain sort of principles and relationships, and I want to kind of review those with you. First, the climate is easy to change, but if you change it and then it falls back to the way it was before, it doesn't change the culture. If you change the climate and then you maintain that climate over a period of time, it does begin to change the culture. Organizational culture is looked at in many different ways by different people in the field. The model that we have found to be most effective comes from the organizational functioning literature, which is 25, 30 years of research on what are the factors in the organization that get at the culture and what are the effects of those factors. So one example of that would be a variable that has been studied a lot, which is called perceived organizational support. And that means I work in your organization. You give me a goal, you give me some resources, but when I have difficulty achieving that goal, do I have your support in troubleshooting what I could do better and in changing my strategy and in becoming more effective? Or is the way we do things here, it's up to you to figure that out. We pay you to come up with solutions. So don't tell me about problems, tell me how you solved those problems. Now, different organizations have different cultures with respect to that kind of support. Now, that turns out to be a strong predictor of safety outcomes, that particular variable. And there are 5 or 6 other variables. Another one is upward communication. Does information flow up through the organization? Or does it get stopped at places in the organization? And I think you've all seen examples where it gets stopped, and as a result of that, there's some kind of calamity. So having a culture in which the way we do things is it's acceptable to pass information up, even if it's not what you know people want to hear. It's still not only is it acceptable, but that's what we want you to do. We want you to tell us about stuff, and that information flows up to the top. So now those are examples of 2 variables. There are 5 or 6, but those are things that predict safety performance, and they also predict performance in general. They get at absenteeism, for example. They get at turnover, for example. They get to burnout, productivity. So is this the kind of place that you would like to work? Is this the kind of place you'd like to have your son or daughter work at? Is this going to be a positive experience? Is this job you have an asset to you in your life, or is it a liability in your life? All of that is affected very strongly by what was called in the research organizational functioning, those set of variables. Safety is one of the things that is a positive outcome. So if your goal as an organization is to improve safety, that's what you want to do, then you want to improve the safety climate, the value for safety. Do we think it's important or not? Do our leaders think it's important or not? And you want to do that long enough to become part of the culture. And at the same time, you want to improve upward communication and perceived organizational support and teamwork and my respect for my boss and the other set of variables that go into all of that. So one of the questions that was asked is, how do you hire and promote for effective safety leadership. So when you're selecting someone for the job, do you take into account, is this person an effective safety leader? When you are looking at a promotion, replacing someone, putting someone in a different job, do you take a look at to what extent is this person an effective safety leader? It's very important, but it's not usually done. It's usually done in a pretty informal kind of a way. Do we know that John or Mary is a strong supporter of safety? Do they have that reputation? Do they talk up in meetings? We kind of get a general impression. But are they really an effective safety leader, which is a lot more than that? We in organizational life are not inclined to look at that very carefully. And it's a huge improvement opportunity, because that's the strongest, if there's one single thing that you want to change to make improvements in your overall safety culture, safety functioning, safety outcomes, it would be the quality of safety leadership. So getting that on the table early when you hire people, when you promote people, becoming a part of your process is very important. It's a great question. So one of the areas that we have studied a lot and that we think is a really important opportunity for improvement is around the area of safe decision making. If you look at serious and fatal injuries and you say what decisions were made that related to this event occurring, typically you first think of the last thing that happened before the incident occurred. And then you look at, well, the decision was made to not follow the procedure that was ordinarily done or that was supposed to be done. And in many cases, you stop there. Organizations stop there. They say if the worker would have followed the procedure, incident wouldn't have happened. That was what happened. And we stop. However, we find from our research on decision making that that doesn't really tell the whole story. The broader story relates to previous decisions that were made that led up to and set the stage for the decision that was closest to the incident itself. So if you see that the individual worker didn't follow the procedure, if you go backwards in time and say, well, is this a procedure that people follow in general? Or is this a procedure that people follow only when someone is standing next to them and reminds them of it? But in fact, we've kind of learned informally that that's not a procedure that you really need to follow. Or to follow that procedure would require support that I'm not getting. I would have to be able to know things or do things or have equipment that I don't have. And as a result of that, it would be a lot of extra work for me to actually follow that procedure. And that situation has been known by leadership and has been tolerated by leadership. And that toleration, those are decisions that are made. Now, if you then say, well, why do people make those kinds of decisions? The work of Kahneman and Tversky comes into play on cognitive biases. And the question is, on what basis do I make a decision that has potential safety impact? And that amounts to a probability estimation. So when I'm making that kind of decision, I'm estimating what is the probability that this is going to get me in trouble? Somebody's going to get hurt as a result of this thing. And unfortunately, as you know from the cognitive bias literature started by Kahneman and Tversky, we the human brain is prone toward making generalizations that don't actually follow the data very closely. And we call those cognitive biases. Having studied literally hundreds of events from that standpoint, we find that it's very common to see something called normalization of deviance, which I mentioned just a second ago. We also see something called overconfidence bias. So I say to myself, I know this isn't the procedure, but these people that are doing it are people that I know really well. They know what they're doing. I wouldn't have anybody do this, but these folks can do this. That's called overconfidence bias. I can do it. That's called overconfidence bias. So the work has, from our side, has been to study large numbers of events and determine what kinds of decisions are being made, how do they influence the safety outcomes, what level is making them, and then what kind of biases are influencing them and compromising the safety that we're trying to accomplish. In the course of analyzing hundreds and hundreds, thousands of decisions, and analyzing what went wrong, why did the decision maker take the course of action that they took, which wasn't the best way to handle it. What we found is that roughly half of the time, the decision was made without consideration for the safety implications. So sometimes the question is, well, is this okay? Is this safe? Is operating this vehicle under these conditions to do this thing safe? Meaning, is the probability low enough that we feel comfortable doing it? But there is also the question of, do we realize that the decision we're about to make has safety implications? And our finding was that about half of the time, people make those decisions without awareness that this has safety implications. So we've got to do budget cutting. Do we think about how we cut this budget is going to have safety implications? Now, when I say how, I mean where we cut, and I mean how we go about it, how we communicate with people, and the entire package, not simply the narrow decision. So what we have found is very helpful to organizations is at the beginning of the meeting, many organizations, most these days, have a safety moment or something of that kind that is at the beginning of the meeting. The idea is that we take 5 minutes, we talk about something related to safety, and that brings it into everybody's awareness that this is important, and that's a good thing to do. Now, the problem is that tends to devolve over time, and at some point you kind of run out of things to talk about in the safety moment, and it can become rote and inefficient. So what we have learned is that it's very beneficial before the meeting to have someone think about what are the decisions that are likely to be made in this meeting. What are the considerations that are likely to be discussed in this meeting, and how do they have implications for safety? And then that first 5 minutes of the meeting is to say, look, we're going to talk about 3 things today. 2 of those have safety implications, and here they are. So this is a really good question. I want to just read it to you. I like the idea of a broader look at safety, including wellness. Can you help me understand? You started by saying you've got to focus on the big items, the dangerous things that can really get a person seriously hurt or killed. Help me square that you've got to look at this broadly and you have to focus on what can seriously hurt us. How do we move from catastrophic events to well-being? So it's a great question. And the thing that unites those 2 things is the culture of the organization. The same culture that lowers the likelihood of having a serious injury increases the well-being of the employee. Now, you can see that in all kinds of specific areas. We've developed some models. We're working on getting a group of companies together to study this in more detail because everybody is interested these days in well-being for various reasons. It's, I think, a positive turn. But the basic idea is, do you create an environment in which I am thriving by virtue of being in this environment? I'm learning things. I get excited about what I'm doing. I have a sense of accomplishment from what I'm doing. I have high self-efficacy, meaning I get traction in what I'm doing. I feel like I'm being part of something important. In your organization, you have a tremendous value for science. And that's embedded in your culture. It's deeply embedded in your culture. Anything that contributes to science is going to be well received by people. So it really isn't a long stretch to connect these two. They actually go together quite nicely. And the main idea is to figure out, as a leader, what decisions do I make that creates the environment that is positive to well-being. So there are all kinds of different things that contribute to that environment. There's my relationship with co-workers. There's my relationship with my boss. There's my relationship to the goals that I am given. There's my sense of the work that we're doing in this organization is really important. All of those things contribute to the culture that's desirable, in which the likelihood of having a serious injury goes way down, and all of those things contribute to my sense of well-being. So in just concluding my remarks, I hope you enjoy the workshop that you're going through, or that you're in the middle of, or that you're just getting ready to start. And I guess I want to encourage you that this is this improvement that you're set on making, that is creating a positive work environment, positive safety culture, having better safety results. This is something you can do. And I don't mean by that it's easy or that there are no obstacles. I realize there are all kinds of obstacles. That's the nature of the beast. But I can tell you, in organizations that I have worked with, some very similar to yours, if the leadership gets together and says, we're going to figure out how to do this, you can do this. Thank you. So one of the questions that was asked is, how do you hire and promote for effective safety leadership? So when you're selecting someone for the job, do you take into account, is this person an effective safety leader? When you are looking at a promotion, replacing someone, putting someone in a different job, do you take a look at, to what extent is this person an effective safety leader? It's very important, but it's not usually done. It's usually done in a pretty informal kind of a way. Do we know that John or Mary is a strong supporter of safety? Do they have that reputation? Do they talk up in meetings? We kind of get a general impression. But are they really an effective safety leader, which is a lot more than that? We in organizational life are not inclined to look at that very carefully. And it's a huge improvement opportunity, because that's the strongest, if there's one single thing that you want to change to make improvements in your overall safety culture, safety functioning, safety outcomes, it would be the quality of safety leadership. So getting that on the table early, when you hire people, when you promote people, becoming a part of your process is very important. It's a great question.